There are so many legendary starships in the Star Wars galaxy. Arguably, the most notorious design in the universe is the Star Destroyer. The classic Imperial Class is probably the second most iconic starship in all of Star Wars lore, after the Millennium Falcon. In this video, we're going to take a deep dive into the fascinating history of the Star Destroyer from the Clone Wars through to the First Order as their capabilities evolved. We'll also look at the many different classes of this style of ship, from the Clone Wars era Venator Class to the First Order's insanely overpowered Xyston Star Destroyer. The Star Destroyer emerged during the Clone Wars before the Empire ran wild with the concept. However, it's worth looking at what came before and may have inspired their in-universe designers. If we go all the way back to the Knights of the Old Republic era and Legends, we can see some of the earliest proto-Star Destroyers. The Mandalorian Neo-Crusader fleet had a dagger-shaped warship that was very similar in profile to the Clone Wars era Venator Class. We don't have many specs about this ship, but it bears a remarkable resemblance to the Venator because of the layout of its four main thrusters. This is possibly the first wedge-shaped warship in the galaxy. It's not a Star Destroyer in name, but it was definitely a distant ancestor. That pointy silhouette is a key feature of every Star Destroyer because it instantly intimidates opponents. Another ship we know more about was the Interdictor class cruiser. Not to be mistaken for the Galactic Empire's similarly named Star Destroyer, this was one of the Sith Empire's most important command vessels. The most famous model was the Leviathan, Darth Malak's flagship. The Interdictor was one of the biggest ships of the period at 600 meters long. It has a crew of over 5,000, 3,600 ground troops, and 5 medium turbo laser batteries. The Knights of the Old Republic campaign guide tells us that they also carried a complement of 48 Sith interceptors. This was a true multi-role capital ship that could work as a fleet carrier and off-world command post. They could also rain down destruction on planets, as we see when they bombard Taurus's Overcity. Some models even had gravity well projectors that could stop their foes from jumping to hyperspace. The new Essential Guide to Weapons and Technology informs us that they were the equivalent of Imperial Star Destroyers in the Old Republic era. It's worth noting that the pointy wedge-shaped profile is very much a common feature of Sith warships over thousands of years. Arguably, the Harrower Class Dreadnought is the most Star Destroyer-adjacent ship of the Old Republic era. Any fan of the Old Republic MMORPG will instantly recognize it. The Harrower was the backbone of the Sith Empire for 800 years, and had a very similar role to its distant descendants. The Old Republic Encyclopedia tells us that it was almost 800 meters long and carried a full crew complement of 2,400. This was definitely a big and powerful beast. The Harrower's armament included over 32 turbo laser batteries, proton torpedo bays, quad lasers, and up to 95 starfighters. They had the firepower to take on smaller capital ships and could coordinate Imperial fleets as a command ship. In Book of Sith: Secrets from the Dark Side, Darth Sidious even describes how his Imperial Star Destroyers are similar to the Harrowers and would be his tools of discipline. It's worth noting that the earlier Centurion-class battlecruiser certainly resembles a Star Destroyer because of its pointy silhouette. However, these large ships were designed for fleet action, not solo domination like the Harrower. A single Harrower could dominate a system with its long-range capacity and troop deployment capabilities. It's not a true Star Destroyer in name, but it's definitely the closest in doctrine, until the Venator about 3,500 years later. After the fall of the Sith Empire, the Galactic Republic had no real need for massive capital ships because the galaxy fell into a period of relative calm until the Clone Wars. Yes, there are smaller conflicts and skirmishes in Legends and canon, like the New Sith Wars and the Stark Hyperspace War, but these are much shorter in scale and length. Battleships didn't evolve much during this period because there was no need for them. However, this changed after the Battle of Geonosis, when the galaxy fell into the most destructive conflict for thousands of years. The Republic began the Clone Wars with the Acclamator class assault ship as the backbone of its fleet. This was a proto-Star Destroyer, but it was primarily a troop carrier. Notably, it carried no starfighters, which was a massive disadvantage. Typically, Acclamators traveled in convoys with the bigger Venator, the first true Star Destroyer. According to the in-canon Ultimate Star Wars reference book, the Republic commissioned the Venators at the start of the Clone Wars. We know from the Clone Wars TV show and other sources that the Sith secretly manipulated the creation of the clone army, including these massive ships. Venators were the backbone of the Republic Navy and served as flagship for their fleets. They were multifunctional, serving as starships and troop carriers, command posts, and essential cargo transports. Manufactured by Kuat drive yards, they ran up to 1,155 meters in length with a variety of armaments. Both the Venator 1 and its successor, the Venator 2, were capable of ship-to-ship combat with 8 heavy turbo laser turrets. They're not the first true Star Destroyer just because of their name, but because they solved every problem. They could operate with independence because of their massive fuel stores, medical bays, and repair facilities. Meanwhile, they were the first destroyers that properly doubled as fleet carriers. Their 2 massive flight decks could hold 420 starfighters, including V-Wings, ARC-170s, and gunships. These ships had at least 52 laser cannons for anti-starfighter purposes. Venators are also known as Jedi cruisers because many Jedi generals used them as their command ships. In the Clone Wars, Anakin Skywalker primarily operated from the Resolute, commanded by Admiral Wolf Yularen. Meanwhile, Admiral Coburn and Obi-Wan Kenobi commanded the Negotiator. Another notable feature of the Venator is its dual bridges. One bridge served as the ship's primary command center, while the other was dedicated to starfighter operations. This was a strength and a weakness because it decentralized both sections, but also left these bridges more exposed. The Venator was a fascinating ship and arguably the most complete capital ship design in Star Wars history. It was the only mainstream capital ship designed to excel simultaneously at fleet combat, fighter warfare, planetary operations, command, and independent action without leaning on superweapons or crazy gimmicks. Give your opinion in the comments. At this point, it's worth doing an aside on Kuat drive yards because this starship manufacturer was the primary designer and builder of Star Destroyers. Kuat was arguably the Empire's second most significant world after Coruscant. Originally owned by the Techno Union, Kuat Drive and its subsidiaries designed every Star Destroyer from the Clone Wars era Venator to the First Order's Resurgent class. Located in the core, Kuat was one of the most strategically significant planets in the entire galaxy. It had almost exclusive rights to produce the Republic's land vehicles and starships during the Clone War, and immediately assumed the same role with the Empire. In the canon novel Aftermath: Life Debt, we see how the Rebellion immediately made taking the Kuat drive yards a priority after the Battle of Endor. Meanwhile, in Legends, KDY maintains neutrality and continues to supply both the Imperial Remnant and the Republic. Basically, it's too powerful and influential for the New Republic to shut down. We associate the Venator with the Galactic Republic, but many second-generation ships also served under the Empire. This makes sense because the new government still needed a fleet to consolidate power. They swiftly painted the ships gray, removing the old Republic's red livery. In Return to Kamino, an episode of the Bad Batch TV series, we see 3 Imperial Venators rain destruction down upon Tipoca City. Meanwhile, another on-screen appearance shows Emperor Palpatine, Darth Vader, and Grand Moff Tarkin observing the construction of the Death Star from the bridge of a Venator at the end of Episode 3. However, the Empire gradually began to phase it out between 19 and 14 years before the Battle of Yavin, as they developed a new doctrine and strategic approach. The Venator's immediate replacement was the Victory Class Star Destroyer. Curiously, we've never actually seen a Victory Class on screen in movies or TV shows. However, it is a canon ship, as we know from many reference guides and novels. We also see it move and fight in the Empire at War strategy game. The Tarkin novel is the first time that it appears in the new canon, and informs us that Sentinel Base was first deployed from a Victory Star Destroyer. This means that the ships actually served in the Republic Navy before the Empire inherited them. The Victory class bears a strong resemblance to the later Imperial Class Star Destroyer with a chunky dagger-like profile and that distinctive raised bridge. It's actually slightly shorter than the Venator at 900 meters and had a smaller crew of just 5,200. However, the biggest difference was that the Victory class only carried a few dozen starfighters compared to the Venator's hundreds. This is a crucial moment in the history of Star Destroyers because it clearly shows the Empire's change in doctrine. The Clone Wars were over, so there was no longer a need for a giant carrier command ship. These new Star Destroyers had much heavier firepower with a focus on fear, control, and brute force. The Empire wanted to project power and to intimidate worlds across the galaxy. Victory-class Star Destroyers were effectively heavy assault ships designed for planetary pacification. Later, it was common for several Victory-class Star Destroyers to serve as part of an assault group led by a single Imperial-class Star Destroyer. During the Rebellion, Victory Star Destroyers typically traveled in pairs. The Empire made a deliberate decision to forego starfighter squadrons in favor of heavy firepower, but this was also arguably the Victory's biggest weakness. They often depended on the Lancer-class frigate as an escort because of its anti-starfighter capabilities. In Legends, the Victory 2 class clearly supersedes the original Victory 1. They're in a constant thorn in Rogue Squadron's side in Michael A. Stackpole's X-Wing novels. Some older Victory Star Destroyers even see service all the way through to the war against the Yuuzhan Vong in the new Jedi Order series. According to Starships of the Galaxy, the Victory 2 had 20 turbo laser batteries and another 20 heavy turbo lasers. Other useful weapons included 10 heavy ion cannons and 10 tractor beam projectors. This made them useful for interdiction missions, especially against pirates and smugglers. According to the canon Starships and Speeders, each Victory class cost 50 million credits to construct. However, eventually the Victory class was superseded by the most iconic Star Destroyer of them all, the Imperial Class. For many people watching this video, this is the definitive Star Destroyer. It's the second ship we see in the original trilogy after the Tantive 4. Who can forget the first time they saw its massive bulk taking forever to cross the screen in A New Hope? It's truly an incredible design and easy to see why this Star Destroyer captured the imagination. These ships didn't just magically appear with the Empire. Kuat Drive Yards first designed them before the end of the Clone Wars in small numbers, designating them the Imperator Class. According to Star Wars: The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, Kuat Drive rebranded the ship and made some slight modifications to reflect the Empire's new strategic vision. The result was a bigger and more balanced platform than the Victory class because it was a true multi-role capital ship. Aesthetically, it resembles its predecessor, but in practice, it's more like the Venator. The Imperial Star Destroyer was designed to enforce the Empire's presence everywhere. These were enormous ships at 1,600 meters in length with a crew of 37,000 and almost 10,000 stormtroopers. Nonetheless, an Imperial Star Destroyer could sustain itself for up to 2 years. Most of the Imperial Star Destroyers we see throughout the original trilogy are second-generation versions, nicknamed the Imp Star Deuce by Rebel pilots. They had a typical loadout of 60 turbo laser batteries, 60 ion cannons, and 10 tractor beams. Crucially, they also had far more starfighters with up to 72 TIE fighters or 6 squadrons, as well as shuttles, landing craft, and ground vehicles. This made the Imperial Star Destroyer far more flexible and one of the most feared weapons in the galaxy. According to Star Wars Uprising, the Empire operated 25,000 Star Destroyers at its height, with 24 in each of its controlled sectors. There were many notorious Imperial Star Destroyers, including Darth Vader's Imperial 1 class, the Devastator. This was the ship that captured and boarded the Tantive 4 and set the standard for Imperial might. In Rebels and Legends, we encountered Grand Admiral Thrawn's flagship, the Chimera, noteworthy for its blue hull markings. Admiral Piet commanded the Avenger, while the Relentless was Vader's flagship before the Executor in the Legends Expanded universe. Of course, the Empire didn't stop there. Even when they were committing ludicrous resources in building the Death Star, they still found time to come up with yet another Star Destroyer. This time, we're talking about the Executor class Star Dreadnought, one of the most staggeringly insane spaceships in galactic history. Also commonly known as Super Star Destroyers, these ships were on a scale like none before them. They retained the pointy dagger silhouette of other smaller Star Destroyers, but were significantly longer at 19,000 meters. They were effectively flying cities with a crew of over 28,000 and a further 38,000 troops and support staff. In the Star Wars Imperial Handbook, Mon Mothma acknowledges that the Rebellion wouldn't have the resources to crew a Super Star Destroyer, even if they did successfully capture one. Meanwhile, they boasted unimaginable firepower. Star Wars On the Front Lines reveals that each Super Star Destroyer had over 5,000 turbo lasers, 125 concussion missiles, and 250 quad laser cannons. They had a starship complement of over 1,000, including 144 TIE series fighters. The remaining ships were assault shuttles and support craft. An Executor class could also carry 24 AT-ATs and 50 AT-STs. In Legends, this ship was supposed to be the equivalent of between 10 and 20 Imperial Star Destroyers. It was the epitome of the Tarkin Doctrine. the Empire's core military philosophy that supported ruling the galaxy through fear and the projection of power rather than constant combat. The Executor is the most famous and iconic example of an in-canon Super Star Destroyer. Present at Hoth, Endor, and many battles in between, it served as Darth Vader's flagship. The Sith Lord was one of the driving forces behind its development. Designed by Kuat Drive Yards, it was actually constructed at Fondor shipyards. I think it's interesting to compare Vader's priorities to Grand Admiral Thrawn, who fought to develop the TIE Defender, a specialized starfighter. Arguably, the Executor class was a strategic error and an example of the Empire's hubris. It doesn't really make sense to make them the mainstay of a fleet because they're overkill. An Imperial Star Destroyer has more than enough firepower to dominate a planet. A Super Star Destroyer can only be in one place at a time. For the same resources, they could have 20 Imperial Star Destroyers patrolling multiple systems. Meanwhile, they require massive crews and resources. They're also disproportionately vulnerable to small, precise attacks. The Executor goes down in Return of the Jedi after an A-Wing crashes into its bridge. This causes a catastrophic loss of maneuverability, and the ship collides with the Death Star. A single pilot, Arvel Krynard, took out tens of thousands of Imperials in a blaze of glory. According to the canon Star Wars Complete Locations, the Empire built more than a dozen Executor-class Star Destroyers. General Tagg commanded the Annihilator, which was later captured by pirates and renamed Liberty's Misrule. Ironically, Tagg complains about the Death Star in A New Hope because he believes it's a waste of resources. Other supers included the Arbitrator, the Ravager, and the Lusankya. Yes, the Lusankya officially became canon in the 27th issue of the Star Wars Build the Millennium Falcon magazine series. To sum up, the Executor class is a very polarizing ship, but there's no denying that it looks awesome. However, the combination of a functional Death Star and a fleet of Super Star Destroyers would have been almost invincible. It's always fun to speculate what could have happened if the Empire hadn't lost at Endor. However, that's exactly what did happen, and this gave rise to a period of turmoil across the galaxy. We're going to focus on Legends for most of this section because there actually isn't much information in canon about the period between the fall of the Empire and the rise of the First Order. In Legends, this is commonly referred to as the Warlord era because the surviving Imperials continuously vied for power. It's a massive deviation from the new canon, but still fascinating. There wasn't much development in Star Destroyer technology during this period because the surviving Imperials didn't have the resources. However, this didn't change the ship's significance. Commanding a Star Destroyer was the clearest way for an Imperial Warlord to project power. In Timothy Zahn's original Thrawn trilogy, Grand Admiral Thrawn runs his entire campaign from the Chimera. He focuses on strategic efficiency over mass projections of power. He has no more than 25 Star Destroyers under his command at any point, but they perfectly suit his needs because they're very balanced ships. Make no mistake, even a small fleet of Imperial Star Destroyers could cause serious problems. Admiral Dala had only 4 under her command in the Jedi Academy trilogy, but they wreaked havoc. She used them for blitzkrieg-style attacks, delivering decisive orbital firepower before retreating quickly. However, while she succeeds in causing destruction, her campaign burned out fast because it was unsustainable. She wasted her ships in futile engagements. Dala was too emotional and strategically limited compared to Thrawn, who had a clear long-term vision. Some warlords in Legends preferred the Victory-class Star Destroyers for practical reasons. No, it's not as complete as its big brother, the Imp Star Deuce, but it's more resource-friendly. They made the bulk of Warlord Xinj's fleet. In the X-Wing series, he appreciates their smaller crew capacity and their firepower, which can intimidate planets. Meanwhile, lesser warlords like High Admiral Pterodok even commanded their small fleets from Victory Star Destroyers because they had no choice. There were even some Executor-class Star Destroyers in service throughout this period. Xinj infamously used the Iron Fist as his command ship. He received this vessel from Emperor Palpatine upon his promotion to Admiral, and maintained command after Endor. This gave him an instant advantage over his rival warlords and made him a significant challenge for the New Republic. Nobody wants to go head-to-head with a Super Star Destroyer. Admiral Delvardis also had an Executor class called the Night Hammer, but this put a target on his back. Admiral Dala decided she wanted it to be her flagship in Darksaber and arranged his assassination. Finally, Isan Isard used an Executor class in the most unlikely way in the X-Wing series. The Back to War tells us that the Lusankya was the second Super Star Destroyer to be constructed. In one of the craziest storylines, it was taken to Coruscant and buried beneath the planet's surface. Then the cityscape was rebuilt over it with catastrophic consequences. A section of the ship was used as a prison before Isard activated the ship, blasting its way through 2 levels of the city and killing millions. Few would associate Executor Class Star Destroyers with asymmetrical warfare because they're not exactly subtle. Eventually, the Lusankya fell into the Republic's hands and was part of its fleet until the Yuuzhan Vong War. There wasn't much Star Destroyer technological development in Legends throughout this period because the Warlord simply lacked the economic and material resources for R&D and ship construction. However, there are 2 notable exceptions: the Sovereign and Eclipse class Super Star Destroyers. These gigantic dreadnoughts were essentially the next generation, but saw very limited action under the Emperor Reborn. Both of these enormous ships were superweapons because they each had an axial super laser. This could blast through planetary shields like a Death Star and destroy planets. We only know about the Sovereign's specifications through the Imperial Handbook. However, 2 Eclipse-class dreadnoughts appear in the Dark Empire comic series. It's one of the most extreme warships in Star Wars history, with a crew of over 700,000. This concept combined the fleet command benefits of a standard Executor class with the Death Star's superweapon capabilities. Despite this, they had similar vulnerabilities to other Star Destroyers, and both suffered destruction. Again, this is the Emperor doubling down on absolute power and symbolism. These ships aren't canon, but they definitely inspired some of the ships that appeared in the sequel trilogy. Now, let's go back to canon and talk about the First Order Star Destroyers because they definitely developed these ships and took them to another level. There isn't a huge amount of detail about what happened to the remnants of the Empire between episodes 6 and 7, however, what we do know is that they mainly retreated to the unknown regions under the Emperor's direction. This is a crucial difference from Legends because it meant that they retained a cohesive strategy. It also enabled the First Order to develop a new fleet of next-generation Star Destroyers over 30 years. I think it's fair to say that many fans struggle with this part of the new canon. They justifiably ask how the First Order could create such a massive fleet without the New Republic noticing. The main reason was that the unknown regions had incredibly dangerous hyperspace terrain and unmapped gravity wells. Most of the galaxy chose not to explore it, and this allowed the First Order to decentralize their Star Destroyer and TIE Fighter production from traditional shipyards. According to The Force Awakens' incredible cross-sections reference book, Kuat and Tralia Engineering designed most of their capital ships. As the name suggests, this company spawned from the legendary Kuat drive yards. The Rise of Skywalker Visual Dictionary tells us that Sith loyalists infiltrated its executive board, allowing them to secretly funnel supplies and designs to Exegol. The Resurgent-class Star Destroyer was the mainstay of the First Order's fleet. This ship was also a clear upgrade on the dated Imperial Star Destroyer, but maintains that unmistakable menacing profile. The Star Wars Encyclopedia of Starfighters and Other Vehicles reveals that it was an incredible 2,900 meters in length. It had over 1,500 turbo lasers and ion cannons, including 16 primary dual-heavy turbo laser batteries. The Resurgent class had a complement of 2 TIE Fighter wings and the ability to launch them quicker than any previous Star Destroyer. The Resurgent's huge size makes it an obvious successor to the Imperial class, but the designers also went back to the Venator for inspiration. The ventral flight deck, side hangars, and long keel were all standard during the Clone Wars. Meanwhile, they changed the exposed bridge for obvious reasons, because it was a serious flaw in the Empire's Star Destroyers. A Resurgent class could hold up to 82,000 people, including 19,000 officers and 55,000 personnel. This ship was an enormous beast, but nowhere near the biggest in the First Order's fleet. Even larger than the Resurgent was the Mandator 4-class Siege Dreadnought. It's not a Star Destroyer in name, but it definitely is in nature. Again, it has that unmistakable dagger-like profile that struck fear into enemies across the galaxy. The Mandator 4 was an outrageously big ship at 7,669 meters long and over 4,000 meters wide. Poe Dameron describes it as a fleet killer in The Last Jedi. This is not an exaggeration because it possessed devastating weaponry. Each Mandator 4 had 2 orbital autocannons designed specifically to scour planets of life. The Last Jedi Incredible Cross-Sections reveals that it had a crew of almost 200,000, as well as an additional 22,000 stormtroopers. These ships provided shock and awe like nothing else that came before them in modern galactic canon, except for the Death Star. It goes without saying that the First Order doesn't have many of these ships because of the huge number of resources they require. Only 2 have appeared so far in canon. In the Last Jedi Marvel adaptation series, Admiral Akbar says they've more firepower than a dozen Star Destroyers. They're an incredibly devastating weapon, comparable to the old Executor class. A fair question would be why the Mandator 4 has an exposed bridge, unlike the Resurgent. The reason is probably that this siege dreadnought is designed to operate after space superiority is achieved. Then it has the power to shock and awe an exposed planet below. The raised bridge gives it an unmistakable aura and symbolic authority, even if it can be a serious vulnerability. Even this ship wasn't enough for the First Order, who decided they wanted the biggest ship in the history of the galaxy. That was the Supremacy, their sole mega-class Star Destroyer and the flagship of Supreme Leader Snoke's fleet. Again, it was somewhat wedge-shaped, but unlike previous Star Destroyers, it was wider than it is long. And when I say wide, I mean wide. It was a ludicrous 60 kilometers in width and over 13 kilometers long. Unsurprisingly, the Supremacy required a massive crew. The Last Jedi Incredible Cross-Sections explains that it could carry over 2 million personnel, including stormtroopers. It was effectively a self-sustaining battle station that could dock up to 6 Resurgent-class Star Destroyers externally and 2 more internally. Meanwhile, it had 2 shipyards, yes, I said shipyards, as well as ore processing plants, factories, and foundries. The Mega Class had 32 sublight engines as well as a hyperdrive. We don't have specific numbers on the amount of turbo lasers or missiles, but it probably had thousands. Ultimately, the Supremacy isn't invincible despite its borderline psychotic scale. Resistance Vice Admiral Amelin Holdo rammed it near light speed with the Radis, an MC-85 cruiser, and split it in half. This was also the first known ship with hyperspace tracking technology, a resource the First Order later exported to some modified TIE fighters. Finally, let's talk about some specialized Star Destroyers that saw action throughout the Imperial and First Order eras. These were units that were commonly used in conjunction with mainstream ships of the line like the Imp Star Deuce and the Resurgent class. Let's start with the Interdictor class Star Destroyer. This was the gold standard of Imperial niche use destroyers and a valuable addition to every battle group. As every Star Wars fan knows, its gravity well projectors prevented hyperspace escape and could pull ships from hyperspace. Thrawn used them brilliantly to ensnare his enemies in Timothy Zahn's Legends trilogy. They're a common feature throughout the expanded universe. They recur throughout the X-Wing series as the bane of Rogue and Wraith Squadron's existence, as well as in many other novels. Meanwhile, they're increasingly relevant in canon. Hera Syndulla's reaction to the appearance of an Interdictor in the Rebels TV show proves that they were extremely effective ships. Interdictors are essentially remodeled Imperial-class Star Destroyers without the standard weaponry. They never fight alone because they lack the firepower, but are extremely useful alongside other capital ships in an ambush. The Tector-class Star Destroyer was another model that actually appears on screen in Return of the Jedi. This is a ship that many fans may not be aware of, but it's essentially an Imperial Star Destroyer without ventral hangars. Instead, it has more armor and turbo lasers, making it more effective in ship-to-ship combat. However, it also depended on other fleet carriers because it had no starfighters of its own. The Millennium Falcon flies beneath a Tector class during the Battle of Endor. According to the canon Essential Guide to Warfare, Tectors were produced in small numbers alongside the Imperator class during the Clone Wars. They served the Empire for decades, although the standard Imperial class was more popular as an all-rounder. The Empire also used the Executor class, which greatly resembled the Clone Wars era Acclamator cruiser, as a fleet carrier. It first appeared in canon in the Tarkin novel, with the treacherous Vice Admiral Dodd Rancet commanding the Conquest. Executors had a hangar bay capacity of 2 wings, or 144 starfighters, and were one of the biggest carriers in the Imperial fleet. Aesthetically, they clearly resemble the Acclamator-class cruiser from the Clone Wars era. Another canon Star Destroyer was the Onager class, or Imperial Siegebreaker. We know about this from the Rebel files, and it was basically a siege gun with engines. It had a Kyber-powered axial super heavy cannon that could breach planetary shields and surface defenses. The rise and fall of the Galactic Empire explains that the Imperials spent more on developing this class than the Interdictor, even though it was rarely used. There are other wacky specialized Star Destroyers and legends, from the Dominator Class, which was designed for chemical warfare, to the Enforcer Class, which was basically a glorified patrol boat. But the most insane Star Destroyer of them all is 100% canon. Of course, I'm talking about the First Order Xyston class. This greatly resembles a bigger Imperial class Star Destroyer, but it has one crucial difference. The Xyston class was also known as the Planet Destroyer, which tells you everything you need to know. It had a miniaturized axial super laser like the Death Star, with the ability to obliterate worlds. This also effectively rendered the Mandator 4 obsolete. The Rise of Skywalker Visual Dictionary reveals that it was longer than the older Imperial class at 2,400 meters. It also had 40 standard heavy turbo lasers, 40 ion cannons, and 40 point defense laser cannons. Kuat and Trala made them more efficient by automating more of their systems, a key development in Star Destroyer technology. However, they still depended on a crew of almost 30,000. The First Order had 1,080 in its fleet, but ultimately its enhanced automation was its biggest flaw. They lost because the entire Xyston fleet was built around extreme centralization and zero resilience. Once that cracked, everything collapsed fast. It's fun to speculate what would have happened if someone like Grand Admiral Thrawn were in charge, but he probably wouldn't have even wanted them.